Okay, so let's continue. Up until now, we have created NPC actions, health, and let's work on this one first. The action I want to follow the player, and in order to get the information for following the player, we need to create a consideration. Is the player nearby? So let's just do that. Back in our folder, the AI content, let's create a new folder here, and we can call it considerations. And just to save time, let's create another folder for actions. So in our considerations, we need to create a consideration for if the player is nearby. And to do that, that is basically taking this component here, and we need to create a child of it. So to do that, let's go here and create a new blueprint and type in AC, and here is a consideration base class. So that's the one that it's referring to, and let's select that, and we can call it AC consideration is the player nearby as a consideration. And I like to have the considerations always named after like asking a question that we want. And if we open it up, then the very first things we need to do in the consideration is to give it a name here. So is the player nearby? And this name is quite important because much later we will come into debugging this whole process, and during the debug process it will display this is player nearby, so that you know what the AI is actually doing. We have a score here. This is a score. It's always between 1 and 0, and if you score a consideration, the brain will determine which is the highest scoring consideration for the action, and then determine the best action for that. Very important now is, now that we've created the consideration, we have some overrides that we need to work with here. So the brain will call this override score consideration, and if we add this score consideration, we have a function here that we can then actually call. What we can do is, for scoring our consideration, we need to determine where the player is. And if the player is, let's say, within a range, we can then provide it with the score. And if the NPC is by the player, then the score will be 0, so then we don't need to do anything. So what we want to do here is, let's say, get player location, no, get player character. Okay, and if we get the player character, we can get actor location, and we can have the control pawn. So this is the NPC character, and we can say get distance to. Wait, even better. Let's get the distance to. Now, the distance to in Unreal Engine is based on, I believe it's centimeters. So from here we can say if it is greater than, let's say 1000, and we can also do if it is less than 100. So only if it is between this range, yeah. And let's create an and we add these two guys together. And if both of those are true, we can then create a branch. Let's drag it in here. And what we can do is we then need to set the score. Set score. Let's say 0.75. And then we can actually just return that score. If it is not, then we can do exactly the same here. Duplicate that, Control D. We can set this to 0 and pass it. So looking here, we get our player character, we get the distance to, and then we say like basically if it is in between, and depending on this, we can then actually return a score between 0 and 1 of how important this consideration is. Once we've done this, we can actually compile this, save it, and now let's have a look at the action for that consideration. Now that we've created the action for is the player nearby, we want to do this wants to follow a player. So let's do that. Once again, in the utility AI system that is related to this action component, you also need to create a child of this component, and we will then do just that. So to do that, we create a new blueprint. Let's say AI, and here is the action base component. We can then select this component. And let's call it AC action once follow player. Okay, let's go in there, and like with the consideration, let's give it a name, and we can call this wants to follow player. And there is also a score. This score is used by the brain to take into account all the different considerations. So you can have more than one consideration for an action. In our example, we're just having a one-to-one relationship, but it's actually a one-to-many. So you can have an action that considers many different things, and the AI system will give a good average score here to determine if this action is the one that it wants to do. Once we've given it a name, we then have an array here of the considerations, and we can then press the plus sign here, and we can actually see our consideration is the player nearby, and we can then actually select that consideration. So this is saying for this action we want to follow the player, and what do we take into consideration. Now once these have been set, there are a couple of things that we need to inform the brain about, and to see that, you will see this on the overrides in the function. So basically what they are, if the brain wants to abort a specific action, when the brain is going to execute the action, this is what we call get desired location. So this is just the location of where the action is to be performed. Get the name of the considerations, get considerations, as well as if a tick. So the brain will continually provide it with a tick value that you can use to evaluate things while a particular action is on the go. So the first thing to do is when an action is considered, the brain is going to ask the action, where do I get, where should I perform this location? So we can override this guy, and at this stage we can then say to the brain of get player character and location. Get actor location, looks good, and we can then pop that in there. And that's basically telling the brain where the character is. The brain will continually query this function to determine if the character is running around, and then obviously the location of the actor will then change and go forth. Now, in this specific example, when we want to follow the player is moving around, and the action is just to basically get the NPC to the result, but there is no actual execute for it. So just for the purposes of the demo, when the action is being executed, what we can do is basically just put a debug message here for us. So let's print string, and we can then say my NPC has arrived player location. Great. And now that we've done that, we can then actually just compile and we can save that. The next step now is to actually add this action that we created to the list of actions that is on the NPC itself. All right, now that the action is created, it's time to add it to our AI, our NPC character. But before we do that, I realized I made one short mistake on the consideration. Hopefully you saw it as well. Here it's if it's less than 100, then move, or if it's greater, so it's the inverse of what we're trying to do. So here I'm going to say if the distance is, if the player is greater and less than 1000. So now if it's in between these two values, I can then compile and save. Right. Now to add it into our NPC character so that the NPC can actually see the player and move to it, let's open up our NPC character. And from here, we added this component, my NPC actions. And from here, it would look like this. Available actions, let's add it. And from here, I can then choose when to follow player. We can then compile and save this. And now, if we press play, you can see our AI is actually following us. Yeah. And you can see there's also a debug message. So my NPC has arrived. So it would just fire it once because it's arrived. And here we go. And they will follow us around wherever is needed, which is kind of like a nice follow character component. Excellent. So with that, we can then move on to the next topic about the health, and then we can see how the NPC can change its mind and go and get a health thing. So that will be a little bit extra components that we need to create through the process. And yep, see you soon.